I almost made it to the podium before the applause subsided. And there's probably a German word for that experience when you're quiet and you're still stumbling along. So I want to get in line and thank lots of people, but starting with Arlo and all my fellow presenters and the board members, including myself. I'm thanking myself, which is, I revealed myself or flashed my credentials as an only child yesterday, and I remain an only child today, so. But thank you, and thank you all for coming this morning. Is anyone getting a little tired of the family? I don't know, I mean, you know, it's an hour after Thanksgiving dinner. Don't you just want to get out of there? Get some air? I don't know. I picture the family is so suitable for drama and for prose fiction, but they don't quite fit in poetry. I don't know. I picture my image of the novelist is the novelists are looking inside people's windows. They're outside looking in people's domestic life, and sometimes they're looking in the bedroom window even. And there's this kind of endless curiosity about the behavior of people that they invented. There's something, I don't know, odd about that in a way. If you look at it really, if you cast a cold eye on it. Whereas I see the poet as inside the house looking out, you know, and looking at the world and sharing his or her perceptions. But so some of these poems, I'll touch on some family matters, but most of these poems will be from the point of view of someone who is in the ideal condition of being alone. You know, in Wordsworth's little daffodil poem, he begins, I wandered lonely as a cloud, And at the second last line is, he is enjoying the bliss of solitude. So he moves from being alone to enjoying solitude. And so he moves from bad being alone to good being alone. So I'm alone-ish in this one. It's called Walking My 75-Year-Old Dog. She's painfully slow, so I have to stop and wait while she examines some roadside weeds, as if she were reading the biography of a famous dog. And she's not a pretty sight anymore, dragging one of her hind legs, her coat too matted to brush or comb, and a snout as white as a marshmallow. We usually walk down a disused road that runs along the edge of a lake, whose surface trembles in a high wind and is slow to ice over as the months grow cold. We don't walk very far before she sits down on her worn haunches and looks up at me with her rheumy eyes. Then it's time to carry her back to the car. Just thinking about the honesty in her eyes, I realize I should tell you she's not really 75. She's 14. I guess I was trying to appeal to your sense of the bizarre, the curiosities of the sideshow. I mean, who really cares about another person's dog? Everything else I've said is true, except the part about her being 14. I mean, she's old, but not that old. And it's not polite to divulge the true age of a lady. Just messing with you a little bit. And this poem is called 1960. In the old joke, the marriage counselor tells the couple who never talks anymore to go to a jazz club, because at a jazz club, everybody talks during the bass solo. But of course, no one starts talking just because of a bass solo, or any other solo for that matter. The quieter bass solo just reveals the people in the club who have been talking all along, the same ones you can hear on some well-known recordings. Bill Evans, for example, who is opening a new door into the piano while some guy chats up his date at one of the little tables in the back. I have listened to that album so many times, I can anticipate the moment of his drunken laugh as if it were a strange note in the tune. And so, anonymous man, you have become part of my listening, your romance, a romance lost in the past, and a reminder somehow that each member of that trio has died since then, and maybe so have you, and sadly, maybe she. Thank you. Thank you. And this is a Key West poem, or I think it qualifies, and it's called Joy. Joy. It's not often that I see the sun rise and set on the same day as I did the other day. It's easy to tell which is which, even if you just emerge from a coma. The rising is a theater of silvery light, and the setting done and imbued by gold. On the morning I'm thinking about, it rose over a low cluster of clouds, then burst forth and lit up the sunny side of everything. And when it went down in a cauldron of molten metal and seemed to shudder in a foundry of its own making. When I lay in the dark that night, I imagined the sun shining down on Asia, always rising and setting somewhere, waking some people, sending others to bed, as it does in that love poem by John Donne. And I thought of the sun himself advancing in his own grander orbit, a father taking the family of planets for a ride through the Milky Way. What a brazen wonder to be alive on Earth amid the clockwork of all this motion. This was in Key West. It was January, when the early morning hours can be chilly. I remember putting on a sweater, then stepping out onto the deck with the newspaper under my arm and checking out the water and the sky before lighting up a big El Stinko cigar. So I had to ruin that poem. You'd think the brazen wonder of would be the ending. Any sensible poet would have ended on that high note. And then I don't smoke anything, but in that poem I smoke an El Stinko cigar. I want to read, well, this is, we'll get to a sort of, as best I can, closest I can get to a family poem. But first, I'm alone again. In a poem called Cheerios. One bright morning in a restaurant in Chicago, as I waited for my eggs and toast, I opened the Tribune only to discover that I was the same age as Cheerios. Indeed, I was a few months older than Cheerios. For today, the newspaper announced that today was the 70th birthday of Cheerios, whereas mine had occurred earlier in the year. Already I could hear them whispering behind my stooped and threadbare back, "Why, that dude's older than Cheerios." The way they used to say, "Why, that's as old as the hills." Only the hills are much older than Cheerios or any American breakfast cereal, and more noble and enduring are the hills, I surmised as a bar of sunlight illuminated my orange juice. And here's, well, this is a basically an adult speaking to a teenager, and that's for a situation fraught with danger, and hopelessness usually, in the experience I've had, and it's a rather insensitive adult also. And the poem is called "To My Favorite 17-Year-Old High School Girl." Do you realize that if you had started building the Parthenon on the day you were born, you'd be all done in only one more year? Of course, you couldn't have done that all by yourself. So never mind, you're fine just as you are. You are loved for simply being yourself. But did you know that at your age, Judy Garland was pulling down $150,000 a picture, Joan of Arc was leading the French army to victory, and Blaise Pascal had cleaned up his room? No, wait, I mean, he had invented the calculator. Of course, there will be time for all that later in your life, after you come out of your room and begin to blossom, or at least pick up all your socks. For some reason, I keep remembering that Lady Jane Grey was Queen of England when she was only 15, but then she was beheaded, so never mind her as a role model. But a few centuries later, when he was your age, Franz Schubert was doing the dishes for his family. But that did not keep him from composing 2 symphonies, 4 operas, and 2 complete masses as a youngster. But of course, that was in Austria at the height of Romantic lyricism, not here in the suburbs of Cleveland. Frankly, who cares if Annie Oakley was a crack shot at 15, or if Maria Callas debuted as Tosca at 17? We think you are special by just being you, playing with your food and staring into space. By the way, I lied about Schubert doing the dishes, but that doesn't mean he never helped around the house. Thank you. I bless her heart is what you're supposed to say in the South. And I read a poem about my father yesterday, and that was a poem about my stepdaughter. We didn't talk for a couple of years after that. Well, we weren't talking that much anyway, but the silence deepened. So here's a mother poem, it's part of the vital part of the family, called The Lanyard. The other day, as I was ricocheting slowly off the pale blue walls of this room, bouncing from typewriter to piano, from bookshelf to an envelope lying on the floor, I found myself in the L section of the dictionary, where my eyes fell upon the word lanyard. No cookie nibbled by a French novelist could send one more suddenly into the past. A past where I sat at a workbench at a camp by a deep Adirondack lake, learning how to braid thin plastic strips into a lanyard, a gift from my mother. I had never seen anyone use a lanyard, or wear one if that's what you did with them, but that did not keep me from crossing strand over strand, again and again, until I had made a boxy red and white lanyard for my mother. She gave me life and milk from her breasts, and I gave her a lanyard. She nursed me in many a sick room, lifted teaspoons of medicine to my lips, set cold face cloths on my forehead, and then led me out into the airy light and taught me to walk and swim, and I in turn presented her with a lanyard. Here are thousands of meals, she said, and here is clothing and a good education, and here is your lanyard, I replied, which I made with a little help from a counselor. Here is a breathing body and a beating heart, strong legs, bones, and teeth, and 2 clear eyes to read the world, she whispered. And here, I said, is the lanyard I made at camp. And here, I wish to say to her now, is a smaller gift, not the archaic truth that you can never repay your mother, but the rueful admission that when she took the 2-tone lanyard from my hands, I was as sure as a boy could be that this useless, worthless thing I wove out of boredom would be enough to make us even. Thank you. Thank you. Sorry. Here's a poem called The Trouble with Poetry. It's not that long. It's just one of the troubles with poetry, actually. The trouble with poetry. The trouble with poetry, I realized as I walked along a beach one night, cold Florida sand under my bare feet, a show of stars in the sky. The trouble with poetry is that it encourages the writing of more poetry, more guppies crowding the fish tank, more baby rabbits hopping out of their mothers into the dewy grass. And how will it ever end? Unless the day finally arrives when we have compared everything in the world to everything else in the world, and there is nothing left to do then but quietly close our notebooks and sit with our hands folded on our desks. Poetry fills me with joy, and I rise like a feather in the wind. Poetry fills me with sorrow, and I sink like a chain flung from a bridge. But mostly poetry fills me with the urge to write poetry, to sit in the dark and wait for a little flame to appear at the tip of my pencil. And along with that, the longing to steal, to break into the poems of others with a flashlight and a ski mask. And what an unmerry band of thieves we are. Cut purses, common shoplifters, I thought to myself, as a cold wave swirled around my feet, and the lighthouse moved its megaphone over the sea, which is an image I stole directly from Lawrence Ferlinghetti, to be perfectly honest for a moment. The bicycling poet of San Francisco, whose little amusement park of a book I used to carry in a side pocket of my uniform up and down the treacherous halls of high school. Thank you. Well, let's go back to dogs. I didn't have a dog when I was a child, so Jeff Dyer is an only child. He talks eloquently about the condition, and he says the only child is, well, two things. The only child is very hard to initiate love. So if you give the only child love, he or she will respond, but they're not going to make the first move. And the other thing is they're really bad liars, because as growing up, there's no one else to blame. There's no one there but you, so it's, you do everything. I couldn't even blame it on the dog because I didn't have a dog. So if the lamp breaks, it's you. Your father didn't do that. Anyway, here's a poem or two about dogs. In this case, it's just 12 lines long, and it's the dog, sort of imagine the dog thinking to itself and now speaking. The dog on his master. As young as I look, I am growing older, faster than he. 7-to-1 is the ratio, they tend to say. Whatever the number, I will pass him one day and take the lead, the way I do on our walks in the woods. And if this ever manages to cross his mind, it would be the sweetest shadow I have ever cast on snow or grass. How about it? Thank you. And here's a less sensitive dog, also in control of the discourse, you might say, and the poem is called The Revenant, which is just a visitor from beyond who comes back. The Revenant. I am the dog you put to sleep, as you like to call the needle of oblivion. Come back to tell you this simple thing: I never liked you. When I licked your face, I thought of biting off your nose. When I watched you toweling yourself dry, I wanted to leap and unman you with a snap. I resented the way you moved, your lack of animal grace. the way you would sit in a chair to eat, a napkin in your lap, a knife in your hand. I would have run away, but I was too weak. A trick you taught me while I was learning to sit and heel, and greatest of insults, shake hands without a hand. I admit the sight of the leash would excite me, but only because it meant I was about to smell things you had never touched. You do not want to believe this, but I have no reason to lie. I hated the car, hated the rubber toys, disliked your friends, and worse, your relatives. The jingling of my tags drove me mad. You always scratched me in the wrong place. All I wanted from you was food and fresh water in my metal bowls. While you slept, I watched you breathe as the moon rose in the sky. It took all of my strength not to raise my head and howl. Now I am free of the collar, free of the yellow raincoat, monogrammed sweater, the absurdity of your lawn. And that is all you need to know about this place, except what you already supposed and are glad it did not happen sooner, that everyone here can read and write, the dogs in poetry, the cats and all the others in prose. I guess it's actually a pretty appropriate audience for a poem called Hangover. So we're in Key West. Hangover. If I were crowned emperor of this morning, every child who is playing Marco Polo in the swimming pool of this motel, shouting the name Marco Polo back and forth, Marco Polo, Marco Polo, would be required to read a biography of Marco Polo, a long one with fine print, as well as a history of China and of Venice, the birthplace of the venerable explorer Marco Polo, Marco Polo, after which each child would be quizzed by me, then executed by drowning, regardless how much they managed to retain of the glorious life and times of Marco Polo. Thank you. This was a good place to read that poem. So I'm going to read a few poems from this new book I will call Water, Water. And this is not the only copy, by the way. You can have your very own copy. I'll tell you how later. Well, here's a poem called Marijuana. When I was young and dreamy, I longed to be a poet, not one with his arms wrapped around the universe or on his knees before a goddess, not waving from Mount Parnassus, nor wearing a cape like Lord Byron, rather just reporting on a dog or an orange. But one soft night in California, I walked outside during a party, lay down on the lawn beneath a lively sky, and after an interlude of gazing, I happened to swallow the moon. Yes, I opened my mouth in awe and swallowed the full moon whole. And the moon dwelled within me when I returned to the lights of the party, where I was welcomed back with understanding and hilarity, and was recognized long into the night as the man who swallowed the moon, he who had walked out of a storybook and was dancing now with a girl in the kitchen. Thank you. A lot of poets teach for a living. I think someone said poets used to hang out in cafes, and now they hang out at universities. But very few poets write about their teaching. Well, there's a lot of things a lot of poets don't write about, like often the male poets don't write about the wife, the W word. the wife, and they don't talk about their teaching jobs, or so that the poets have could have transcended these bourgeois concerns about working and marriage. But here's a poem about teaching, and it's called BC/AD. One autumn afternoon in the mid-70s, when the two realms of Christian time were still being referred to as BC and AD, a student of mine raised her hand. She had found an error in our textbook. The dates of Plato are messed up, she said. How could he be born in 428, then die in 327? What was he, going backwards? I suppose you could say that everyone born before Christ was, in a sense, going backwards in time without knowing it, I said. Then from the back of the room was heard, so did they all start going forward at Christmas? There are moments in a teacher's life when a discussion has gotten interestingly out of control, and it's time for the allegorical figure of reason to enter the stadium. So while some students joked about the ancients in their togas getting younger by the year, I drew a long horizontal line on the blackboard to represent all of human time, then a vertical line intersecting it at the birth of Christ. And I added a little stick figure of Plato standing on the line and a little zero off to the side. You see, Plato was born 428 years before the birth of Christ. But how did they know that, she asked. Excellent question, I replied. Then from the back, another excellent one. And why did the languages change from English to Latin, from before Christ to Anno Domini? You would think it would be the other way around. You would think, I repeated, moving over to the big window, one finger pressed pensively to my lips, to observe the orange and yellow leaves, patches of blue beyond them, a few ordinary birds darting through the scene, until the bell signaling the end of our class and the beginning of something else rang. This was, after all, an introduction to poetry. Thank you. And I came across and collected Elizabeth Bishop, one of the great authors of Key West, two poems facing each other. One was called Sleeping on the Ceiling, and the other one was called Sleeping Standing Up. Well, it's poetry, so fine, it's good. But I thought, I want to get into this, and I thought the only way to respond was to go conservative. So the poem is called Sleeping on My Side, and it turns into a sonnet at some point. Sleeping on my side, every night when this is better, wait. Sleeping on my side. Every night, no matter where I am, when I lie down, I turn my back on half the world. At home, it's the East I ignore, with its theaters and silverware, as I face the adventurous West. But when I'm out on the road in some hotel's 213 or 402, I could be pointed anywhere, yet I hardly care as long as you are there facing the other way, and we are defended in all degrees, and my left ear is pressing down as if listening for hoofbeats in the ground. Yeah. And this poem is really about a thought that bubbles up into our heads at times. I think no one's exempt from this. And the thought is in the form of a wondering or a questioning. And the question is, who's going to go first? A friend of mine said he was kept awake some nights wondering which Everly brother would go first. but that question has been sadly answered. Anyway, this is called Me First. We often fly in the sky together, and we're always okay. There's our luggage now waiting for us on the carousel. And we drive lots of places in all manner of hectic traffic. Yet here we are, pulling in the driveway again. So many opportunities to die together, but no meteor has struck our house. No tornado has lifted us into its funnel. The odds say then that one of us will go before the other, like heading off into a heavy snowstorm, leaving the other one behind to stand in the kitchen or lie on the bed under the fan. So why not let me, the older one, go first? I don't want to see you everywhere as I wait for the snow to stop before setting out with a crooked stick calling your name. The book before Water, Water was called Musical Tables, and it was a collection of very small poems, and I mean three lines or 4 lines, 2 lines. And I thought I'd read a few, just to give you a sample of them. And I'll just say the title and read a few. 3 a.m. Only my hand is asleep, but it's a start. Highway. Hitchhiking alone, I notice an ant walking in the opposite direction. Carbon dating. He tried it once as a last resort, but most of the women were 1 million years old. New York directions. It's down in the village between Bleak and Bleakest. Some of these are a little rough, but refrigerator light. The minute she slams the door, I stop thinking about her. Motel parking lot. Saying goodbye is so sad, I don't even bother to turn around to see what it was you just threw at me. I'm staying in a really nice hotel here, but this is called Bad Hotel. I told the woman from housekeeping, who was eager to do my room, to just come in and pretend I'm not here, which is exactly what I had been doing ever since I checked in. Believe it or not, the title of this poem is Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. Trouble was not his middle name. And then, well, here's a family poem. It's called Divorce. No more heavy ball, just the sound of the dragged chain with every other step. I have another divorce poem. Once 2 spoons in bed, now tined forks across a granite table, and the knives they have hired. Yeah, it hurts, doesn't it? And one last poem of this series, and then the poem is called Children. There's a new movie out titled Children. I don't know what it's about, but I like the voice on the radio when it says, children now playing everywhere. And, okay, I have 2 minutes here. Okay. Well, it's all gold. I just flip it open everywhere, I mean. So, here's one called Design. I'm alone here. You know, and when I started writing poetry as an only child, it was in an effort to be more alone. I wanted to intensify the aloneness, really dig into it. Design. I pour a coating of salt on the table and make a circle in it with my finger. This is the cycle of life, I say to no one. This is the wheel of fortune, the Arctic Circle. This is the ring of Kerry, I say to the ghosts of my family, the dead fathers, the aunt who drowned, my unborn brothers and sisters, my unborn children. This is the sun with its glittering spokes and the bitter moon. This is the absolute circle of geometry, I say to a crack in the wall, to the birds who cross the window. This is the wheel I just invented to roll through the rest of my life, I say, touching my finger to my tongue. Thank you.